a warm evening in Skyline City buzzed with life. Jackson Wright leaned back in the leather seat of his sleek midnight blue Range Rover, letting the rhythmic hum of the urban chaos provide the perfect backdrop for what should have been a joyous night. Fresh off the release of his latest single, which was already racking up glowing reviews, Jackson looked forward to celebrating with the people who had stood by him through it all. On his phone, a text from his manager and longtime friend, Caleb Foster, lit up the screen. "We're outside the restaurant, bro. Can't wait to check out this place you picked." Jackson chuckled and quickly texted back, "Hold tight, pulling up now." This night was about more than good food. It was about gratitude, laughter, and taking a moment to breathe with his closest crew. Caleb, Maya, and 2 young up-and-comers from his label were all waiting near the restaurant's entrance. The group had weathered countless late-night studio sessions, brutal tour schedules, and the cutthroat nature of the industry. Tonight was their well-earned escape. As Jackson pulled up to Luster and Vine, the valet area glimmered with sophistication. The restaurant, with its minimalist glass facade and softly glowing lights, radiated exclusivity. Jackson adjusted his tailored jacket and stepped out, immediately spotting his group near the door. "Jackson in the house," Caleb called, pulling him into a firm handshake that turned into a hug. The group laughed, their spirits light as they swapped inside jokes and playful jabs while heading to the grand entrance. Inside, the restaurant's ambiance oozed luxury. Crystal chandeliers bathed the polished oak tables in a warm glow, and the gentle hum of a live jazz trio added to the air of refinement. Servers moved with precision, clad in sharp, perfectly tailored uniforms. Jackson was no stranger to lavish settings, but even he could feel the weight of the meticulous care put into the decor. He approached the hostess stand, flashing a warm signature smile. "Reservation for Wright, party of 6, he said. The hostess, a young woman with a slick ponytail and a poised demeanor, scanned the reservation system. Her expression faltered slightly before she straightened and replied, "One moment, sir." Maya leaned in toward Jackson and whispered, "She just gave us that you don't belong here look." Jackson shrugged. "She's probably just double-checking," he replied calmly, though a faint sense of unease stirred within him. Minutes ticked by, and the hostess returned, her demeanor cooler than before. "I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, but it seems there's been an error with your reservation. We don't have a table available tonight." The mood shifted instantly. Caleb frowned, crossing his arms. "That can't be right. I called this morning and confirmed." The hostess avoided his gaze. "Unfortunately, we're fully booked this evening. I apologize for the inconvenience." "Fully booked?" Maya's voice cut through, sharp with disbelief. "We just walked past open tables. What's really going on here?" The hostess's lips pressed into a tight line, her voice remaining neutral. "Those tables are reserved for other guests." Tension hung in the air. Jackson kept his composure, but a familiar heat stirred beneath his calm exterior. "Look," he said evenly, "I understand mistakes happen, but this reservation was made weeks ago. Could you check again?" Before the hostess could respond, a man emerged from the back. His sharp suit and overly confident demeanor screamed authority. He looked at the group with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Is there an issue here?" he asked, his tone suggesting he already knew the answer. "Apparently my reservation doesn't exist anymore," Jackson replied, his voice steady. "Mind explaining how that happened?" The manager's smile was cold and calculated. "Mr. Wright, I apologize for any confusion, but we must adhere to our reservation policy. Unfortunately, we're at capacity tonight." Caleb bristled, his voice rising. "You're seriously turning away Jackson Wright? Do you know who this man is?" The manager's response was clipped. "We treat all our guests equally here, sir." Jackson felt the weight of stares from other diners. Quiet murmurs rippled through the room as people began to recognize him. A slow burn of humiliation mixed with anger as he realized this wasn't about a simple mistake. It was something deeper, something uglier. "Let's go," Jackson said quietly, his voice firm. "But Jax," Maya started, but he cut her off. "I said let's go." The group followed him outside, their celebratory mood shattered. The city lights, usually vibrant, seemed harsher against the night sky. Jackson leaned against the car for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady himself. He had faced many challenges in his life, but this felt personal. This wasn't just about a dinner reservation. It was about what he represented, about being told where he didn't belong. As the group climbed into the car, the air was heavy with unspoken frustration. Jackson stared out the window, the rhythmic hum of the city, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in his chest. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The silence in the car was stifling, each member of the group lost in their thoughts. Finally, Maya broke it, her voice sharp with indignation. "This isn't right. We can't let them get away with this." Jackson Wright nodded, his jaw clenched tight. "Oh, we won't," he replied, his tone resolute. "Trust me, we won't." The low rumble of the Range Rover's engine filled the space as they pulled away from the pristine facade of Luster and Vine. The sleek city lights blurred past the windows, but Jackson barely noticed. His mind churned with frustration and anger, a familiar storm that came with the weight of being judged not by his talent or achievements, but by his skin. This wasn't the first time he had experienced the insidious sting of discrimination, nor was it likely to be the last. Fame hadn't shielded him. It had simply changed the backdrop. It wasn't just about being turned away from a restaurant. It was about the unspoken barriers that told people like him where they did and didn't belong. When the car pulled up to Maya's apartment, the tension was palpable. She stepped out but turned back to look at him, her expression fierce. "You know what you have to do," she said, her words hanging in the air even after the door closed. By the time Jackson reached his home, the silence was deafening. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the coffee table. Texts from friends, notifications from social media, and messages from fans who had already caught wind of the incident. He sat down staring at the device, the weight of the evening pressing down on him. The anger that had consumed him earlier had settled into something more focused. Resolve. He couldn't let this slide, not for himself, not for his friends, and not for the countless others who had faced the same quiet humiliation. Grabbing his phone, Jackson opened the camera app. He hesitated for a moment, gathering his thoughts, and then hit record. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady but charged with emotion, "something happened that I can't ignore." As he spoke, the events of the night poured out. But it wasn't just about the reservation. It was about a lifetime of being told where he didn't belong. He spoke for everyone who had ever been made to feel lesser, excluded, or unwelcome because of their race. When he finished, he stared at the screen for a long moment before typing a caption. "It's time for change." With a deep breath, he hit upload. The video went live, and Jackson knew there was no turning back. The next morning, Jackson woke to the relentless buzzing of his phone. Groggy, he reached for it and was met with an avalanche of notifications. His video had gone viral. Fans, friends, and strangers alike had flooded his social media with comments and messages. Sitting up in bed, he began scrolling through the responses. "This is exactly why we can't stay silent," one comment read. "They think they can treat us like this just because we're black," said another. Some messages were deeply personal, recounting experiences of being ignored, dismissed, or humiliated in public spaces, restaurants, stores, workplaces. The words hit hard, each one a painful reminder that what had happened to him was far from unique. Jackson felt a familiar ache in his chest. He had lived this reality his entire life, but seeing it reflected in so many voices made it impossible to ignore the bigger picture. This wasn't just about him anymore. By midday, the video had reached every corner of the internet. Headlines splashed his name across platforms, framing him as the center of a growing wave of outrage. Luster and Vine was being inundated with accusations of racism. Their Instagram page had become a battleground of angry comments and one-star reviews. The phone call from Caleb came as no surprise. His voice buzzed with a mix of anger and exhilaration. "Bro, have you seen this? Your video is everywhere. People are pissed, like full-on boycott levels of pissed." Jackson rubbed the back of his neck, still processing the overwhelming response. "I've seen it. People are sharing their stories, man. It's bigger than just me." "That's exactly it," Caleb said. "This isn't about last night. It's about all the nights people like us got turned away, disrespected, made to feel like we don't belong. This is the moment. We've got to do something." Jackson leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city skyline. It seemed alive with an energy that mirrored his own, a simmering anger ready to erupt into action. "You're right," he said finally, "but it can't just be about calling them out. We need to show them who we are, Build something they can't ignore. Caleb's voice crackled with determination. Say the word, and I'm in, whatever it takes. After the call ended, Jackson sat in silence, his mind racing. He thought of all the moments that had led to this, every sidelong glance, every unspoken rule designed to keep him out. It was exhausting, but for the first time it felt like people were truly listening. Later that afternoon, Maya arrived at his house, her expression set with determination. She dropped her bag on the counter and pulled out her phone. You've seen the comments, right? People are fed up. Jackson nodded, a small fire igniting in his chest. Then it's time we give them something to believe in. This was no longer about one night. It was about changing the game entirely. We can't let this momentum fade, Maya said firmly, setting her bag down and motioning for Jackson Wright to sit. He nodded, gesturing for her to continue. I know. Caleb's been all over it. He's blowing up my phone about boycotts and protests. Maya leaned forward, her eyes fierce. Forget boycotts. Forget protests. We've done that before, and it only gets us so far. This time, we need to do something bigger, something that shows we don't need their tables because we've built our own. Jackson tilted his head, intrigued. All right, what's on your mind? A dinner, Maya said, her voice gaining energy. But not just any dinner. A night that celebrates us. Our culture, our food, our music. We bring together the best chefs, the best artists, and make it so undeniable they can't ignore it. Call it a table for all. The phrase lingered in the air, both simple and profound. Jackson leaned back, a slow smile spreading across his face. A table for all, he repeated. Yeah, I like that. For the next hour, they brainstormed, sketching out ideas for what the event could look like. The dinner wouldn't just be a reaction to Luster and Vine, it would be a bold statement. A celebration of everything the restaurant had tried to deny them. Maya rattled off names of chefs who could help bring the idea to life, while Jackson thought ahead to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one night or one event. It was about building something lasting, something that could inspire others to do the same. By the time they wrapped up, Maya had already drafted a post for social media. With one tap, she sent it out into the digital world. The response was immediate. Within hours, the post had been shared thousands of times, with people tagging their favorite chefs, musicians, and artists. The excitement was electric. It wasn't just about food, it was about creating a space where people could be seen, celebrated, and valued. Later that evening, Caleb called, his voice buzzing with energy. Jax, have you seen Maya's post? People are losing their minds. We've got chefs volunteering to cook, musicians offering to perform, even artists saying they'll donate pieces. This thing is taking off. Jackson grinned, his chest swelling with pride. Good, he said simply. Let's show them what we're about. But as the excitement grew, so did the pushback. Late that night, Luster and Vine released a statement. It was filled with corporate jargon, apologies for any misunderstanding, a renewed commitment to diversity, and a vague promise to do better. The words rang hollow, and everyone knew it. Maya texted Jackson the statement with a single comment. They're scared. Jackson stared at the message for a long time. She was right. They were scared. And they should be. This wasn't just about one night of exclusion. It was about decades of systemic racism, about a society that had decided who deserved a seat at the table and who didn't. But as much as his anger burned, Jackson knew that wasn't the solution. This couldn't just be about tearing something down. It had to be about building something better. He placed his phone down and stared out the window at the city lights. The path ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be criticism, resistance, and plenty of obstacles. But for the first time in a long while, he felt the fire of purpose. This could be the start of something meaningful. The next morning, Jackson sat at his kitchen table with a cup of coffee, a notebook open in front of him. The phrase Maya had coined the night before, a table for all, felt more powerful with every passing moment. It wasn't just a clever name, it was a declaration. A rejection of the gatekeeping and exclusivity that places like Luster and Vine represented. This would be a space where everyone, no matter their background, could feel valued and celebrated. His phone buzzed incessantly as he jotted down notes. Messages poured in from people offering support, sharing their stories, and asking how they could get involved. The momentum was undeniable, and Jackson knew they had to act quickly to channel it into something real. Maya arrived just after noon, a laptop under one arm and an energy drink in hand. She didn't waste time on small talk, setting up at the dining room table. "I've been talking to a couple of chefs," she said, typing as she spoke. "They're in, and not just for the food, they want to help with everything. Promotions, decorations, logistics, the whole 9 yards. Jackson leaned back in his chair, a slow grin spreading across his face. "That's what I'm talking about. This isn't just a dinner, it's a statement." Jackson shook his head. They were scrambling, trying to salvage their reputation. But it wasn't enough. This wasn't about them anymore. This was about creating something new, something better. As the night fell, Jackson looked out over the city once more. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. And this time, they wouldn't just demand a seat at the table. They would build their own. "This isn't just about the food," Jackson Wright said, his voice steady with conviction. "It's about showing the world what happens when we come together." The room buzzed with energy as Jackson, Maya, and Caleb dove into the planning. Maya tapped into her network of musicians, while Jackson reached out to artists and creatives from across Skyline City. Slowly, their vision began to take shape. A night that would honor not only Black culture, but the vibrant diversity of the city itself. By mid-afternoon, Caleb arrived, brimming with excitement. He clapped his hands together as he walked in. "All right, y'all. I've been on the phones all day. We've got some big names interested. A couple of venues downtown are open to hosting, but we'll need to move fast. This thing is blowing up." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "Big names, huh? Like who?" Caleb grinned mischievously. "Oh, you'll see. Let's just say they'll get people talking." The three of them worked late into the evening, hashing out every detail. Finally, they decided on a converted warehouse in the heart of the city. The raw industrial space offered a blank slate, ready to be transformed into something magical. It was perfect, a place that could embody the creativity and resilience of the community. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Jackson leaned back in his chair, tired but invigorated. "This isn't just a dinner," he said, his tone reflective. "It's a statement. We're showing them we don't need their approval. We're building something better." Maya nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "And we're doing it our way." When Caleb left for the night, the foundation was set. They had a venue, a growing roster of chefs and performers, and a clear vision. Now, they just had to make it happen. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind. Maya and Caleb worked tirelessly on logistics, coordinating with chefs, securing decorations, and ensuring every detail was covered. Jackson focused on spreading the word. He recorded heartfelt videos for his social media, speaking about the importance of inclusion and community. Each post was met with overwhelming support. Fans and strangers alike shared their stories of exclusion and discrimination, amplifying the event's message. One story in particular stuck with Jackson. A young woman named Ari shared how her family had been turned away from a restaurant the previous year, despite having a reservation. She described the shame of standing there while people stared and the quiet resignation of walking away, knowing they couldn't fight it. Jackson read her words aloud to Maya and Caleb during one of their late-night sessions. His voice was heavy with emotion. "This is why we're doing this. It's not just about what happened to us, it's about all of them." The night before the event, the warehouse was alive with activity. Chefs unpacked their ingredients, setting up makeshift kitchens along one wall. Long tables were arranged in neat rows, covered in crisp white linens and adorned with simple floral arrangements. String lights hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the space. At the far end of the room, a small stage had been set up. Musicians rehearsed, their melodies filling the air with anticipation. Jackson stood in the center of it all, taking it in. This was exactly what he had envisioned. A space that was elegant yet welcoming, where people could gather and feel at home. Caleb joined him, his hands on his hips as he surveyed the scene. "Man, this is something else. You think they're ready for this?" Jackson smiled, his gaze steady. "They're not ready, but they're about to be." Maya appeared moments later, clipboard in hand. "Everything's on track," she reported. "The chefs are good, the performers are set, and we've got people lined up to document the whole thing." "Good," Jackson said with a nod. "This isn't just about tonight. We need to show the world what we're about." As the final touches were added, Jackson stepped outside for a moment. The cool night air was a welcome break from the bustling energy inside. He thought about all the people who had supported him, who had poured their hearts out in the comments of his posts. This wasn't just for them, though. It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. For every kid stared at in a store, for every family turned away at a restaurant, for every person who had felt the quiet sting of exclusion. This wasn't just a dinner. It was a revolution. The evening of the event arrived, and the once bare industrial warehouse had been transformed into a luminous haven of culture and celebration. The warehouse glowed with warmth and life, transformed into a haven of art, culture, and celebration. String lights hung overhead, casting a golden hue across the room. Long tables draped in pristine white linen stretched elegantly through the space, adorned with fresh flowers and flickering candles that lent the evening a touch of sophistication and intimacy. The air was rich with the enticing aromas of dishes from diverse culinary traditions, blending together into a tantalizing symphony. Guests trickled in slowly, greeted personally by Jackson Wright and his closest allies. Each person was met with warmth and gratitude, their presence a testament to the power of community and resilience. Among the attendees were well-known figures, artists, activists, and chefs, but also everyday people who had been moved by the event's message. They all had one thing in common: the shared experience of feeling excluded or diminished in spaces that should have embraced them. The energy in the room was electric, a palpable mix of excitement, anticipation, and a collective sense of belonging. The walls of the warehouse had been transformed into a gallery. Vibrant art pieces lined the space, each telling a unique story. From bold, colorful paintings celebrating Black culture to poignant photographs capturing quiet moments of resilience, the artwork was as diverse as the crowd it adorned. Standing near the entrance, Jackson surveyed the growing crowd. Dressed in a sharp-tailored suit, he exuded both pride and humility. Caleb joined him, holding a glass of sparkling cider and grinning. "You see this?" Caleb said, gesturing to the buzzing room. "This is what it's all about." Jackson nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Yeah, this is bigger than us. Look at all these people coming together for something real." At the far end of the warehouse, a small stage had been set up for the evening's performances. The lineup was as dynamic as the event itself, featuring musicians, spoken word artists, and even a comedian who had volunteered to perform. Jackson had insisted that the entertainment reflect the diversity and talent of the community, and the performers delivered beyond expectations. As the last guests arrived, Maya stepped onto the stage. Her crimson dress flowed gracefully as she took the microphone, her voice commanding yet warm. "Good evening, everyone," she began, her words amplified by the microphone. "Tonight, we come together not just to share a meal, but to make a statement. We're here to celebrate who we are, where we come from, and the beauty of our community. This isn't just a table, it's a movement." The crowd erupted into applause, cheers echoing through the space. From his spot at the side, Jackson watched with pride swelling in his chest. Maya had a gift for capturing the moment, for articulating what everyone felt but couldn't put into words. The dinner began shortly after, as chefs emerged from their stations, carrying trays of beautifully prepared dishes. Each plate was a masterpiece, reflecting the rich tapestry of cultures represented in the room. Nigerian jollof rice, Jamaican jerk chicken, Southern collard greens, Haitian griot, and other culinary masterpieces were placed on the tables. Each dish told a story, sparking conversations about heritage, tradition, and flavor. Guests marveled at the food, savoring every bite while exchanging stories and laughter. Jackson moved from table to table, shaking hands and listening to the experiences of those who had come. At one table, an older man shared a story about being refused service at a diner decades ago. His voice trembled with emotion as he spoke. "Tonight," he said, looking around the room, "this feels like healing, like we're finally being seen." At another table, a young woman admitted she had been nervous to attend, unsure if she would feel out of place. "But being here," she said, her voice soft yet confident, "it's like I finally belong somewhere." Her words struck a chord with Jackson. This was exactly what he had envisioned, a space where people could come together without fear of judgment, where they could celebrate both their heritage and their shared humanity. As the evening progressed, The stage came alive. A spoken-word artist took the microphone, her voice raw and powerful as she recited a poem about resilience and defiance in the face of racism. The crowd hung on every word, breaking into thunderous applause when she finished. A jazz band followed, their smooth melodies weaving through the room like a warm embrace. Guests swayed to the music, the atmosphere one of joy and connection. Maya joined Jackson at a table, her face glowing with pride. "Can you believe this?" she asked, glancing around the room. Jackson nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd. "Yeah, we did it." The night felt like a culmination of everything they had worked for. A declaration, a celebration, and a healing all in one. Jackson stood quietly for a moment, soaking it all in. The conversations, the laughter, the music, the art. It was a testament to the power of community and the unshakable spirit of those who refuse to be diminished. "And this is just the beginning," Caleb said, his grin wide as he approached Jackson Wright with a bottle of champagne. "I say we toast to that, to the start of something bigger than all of us." Jackson, Maya, and Caleb clinked their glasses together, the soft chime lost in the sea of laughter and animated conversations that filled the room. For the first time in a long while, Jackson felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Not for his music or his fame, but for something that truly mattered. The highlight of the evening came when Jackson took the stage. The chatter in the room quieted as he stepped up to the microphone, his presence both commanding and humble. He paused for a moment, taking in the sight of the crowd gathered before him. "Tonight," he began, his voice steady and charged with emotion, "we proved something. We proved that we don't need their approval to know our worth. We don't need their tables to feel like we belong. We built our own table, and let me tell you, this table, it's for everybody." The applause was thunderous, rising into a crescendo of cheers and whistles. Faces lit up with pride and hope as people stood, clapping and cheering. The energy in the room was electric, a collective realization of what they had achieved together. Jackson raised a hand to quiet the crowd, his expression growing more serious. "But this isn't just about one night," he continued. "This is about changing the game, about making sure that no one, no matter where they come from or what they look like, ever feels like they don't belong. And let me tell you this, we're just getting started." The room erupted again, the cheers louder than before, filling the space with an almost tangible sense of purpose. Jackson stepped down from the stage, his heart pounding with a mix of adrenaline and resolve. He knew this night was only the beginning. As the evening wound down, guests lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth of the space they had created together. Jackson stood near the exit, shaking hands and hugging attendees as they departed. Each thank you and word of encouragement reinforced the importance of what they had done. When the last guest had left, the warehouse fell silent, its echoes still reverberating. Maya and Caleb joined Jackson, their faces tired but triumphant. "We did it," Maya said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Jackson nodded, his gaze steady. "Yeah, and now we keep going." The morning after the Table for All event, Skyline City seemed to hum with a different energy. Social media was ablaze with photos, videos, and glowing posts from attendees who couldn't stop raving about the night. Images of beautifully plated dishes, soulful performances, and candid moments of joy filled every corner of the internet. Hashtags like Table for All and We Belong trended across platforms, capturing the spirit of what had taken place. But not all the attention was celebratory. Luster and Vine, the upscale restaurant that had refused Jackson and his friends, found itself at the center of a growing scandal. Negative reviews poured into their Yelp and Google pages, with customers recounting incidents of being treated poorly, ignored, or turned away due to their race or appearance. The backlash was swift and relentless. By midday, the restaurant released a carefully worded statement, filled with polished but detached language. They regretted any misunderstanding and reaffirmed their commitment to fostering a welcoming environment for all guests. The response only added fuel to the fire. Former employees began coming forward, sharing anonymous stories about the discrimination they had witnessed or been forced to enforce while working at Luster and Vine. One server described being told to prioritize preferred clientele, those who fit the restaurant's ideal image, while subtly discouraging others. Another employee recounted management brushing off concerns about racially insensitive policies. By evening, the restaurant's once pristine reputation was unraveling at an alarming pace. Jackson sat in his living room, scrolling through his phone as the revelations continued to pour in. Maya and Caleb had joined him, equally engrossed in the deluge of news. "Did you see this one?" Maya asked, holding up her phone. A former server said they were told to seat black customers near the kitchen if they couldn't turn them away outright. Caleb shook his head, his expression a mixture of anger and vindication. "Man, they dug their own grave. Years of this nonsense, and now it's all coming out." Jackson leaned back on the couch, his face unreadable. "It's wild. We didn't even have to say much. They exposed themselves." Maya glanced at him, her voice softening. "Yeah, but you sparked it, Jax? That video you posted? It gave people the courage to speak up." Jackson nodded, but remained quiet. This wasn't just about a single restaurant. It was about something much bigger, something that had simmered beneath the surface for too long. As the evening wore on, the revelations kept piling up, painting a damning picture of Luster and Vine's practices. By now, the fallout had reached national headlines. The restaurant's attempts at damage control, vague promises of diversity training and internal reviews, fell flat. Social media continued to skewer them, while former patrons and employees exposed even more troubling details. "They're done," Caleb said, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. Jackson didn't respond immediately, his mind already racing toward what came next. They had shone a light on a deeply ingrained problem. But now, they needed to keep that light burning. This wasn't about tearing something down, it was about building something better. And the work was far from over. "It gave people the courage to speak up," Maya said softly, her words hanging in the air. Jackson Wright nodded, but his mind was elsewhere. This wasn't just about taking down Luster and Vine. It was part of a much larger issue, one that wouldn't be solved by a single scandal. Still, he couldn't ignore the quiet satisfaction of seeing justice catch up with the restaurant that had treated them with such disdain. The next day, the backlash against Luster and Vine reached a fever pitch. News outlets picked up the story, featuring interviews with former employees and customers who shared harrowing accounts of discrimination. Footage from the Table for All event was prominently showcased, juxtaposed with the hollow apologies released by the restaurant. The contrast was striking. One side represented hope and inclusion, while the other stood as a stark symbol of exclusion and elitism. In one particularly damning report, a local news anchor detailed Luster and Vine's long history of catering to an overwhelmingly white clientele, despite being located in one of the most diverse cities in the country. The segment included an interview with a chef who had worked at the restaurant before leaving in frustration. "I was told my dishes were too ethnic to fit the menu," the chef explained. Now running a community-based eatery, he credited Jackson's event with giving him the courage to share his story. Jackson watched the coverage with mixed emotions. He had wanted to create something positive, a showcase of what inclusion could look like. But the fallout for Luster and Vine was a sobering reminder of how deeply entrenched these issues were. That afternoon, the restaurant's owner held a press conference outside the now infamous establishment. A middle-aged man in an impeccably tailored suit stood before a throng of reporters, his expression a carefully crafted mix of regret and defensiveness. "We deeply regret the events that have taken place over the past week," he began, his voice measured but tinged with desperation. "Luster and Vine has always strived to provide a welcoming environment for all our guests. We acknowledge that there have been instances where we fell short of this goal, and for that, we sincerely apologize." The reporters didn't hold back. Questions about employee testimonies, discriminatory seating policies, and the viral backlash came fast and hard. The owner stumbled over his responses, repeating vague promises of change and committing to diversity training for all staff. The press conference, intended to stem the tide of criticism, only deepened the scrutiny. Social media lit up with posts mocking the restaurant's damage control. Many pointed out the lack of genuine accountability in the owner's statements, with comments like, "Another corporate apology without any real action. Diversity training isn't going to fix systemic racism." Later that evening, Caleb burst into Jackson's house, his phone in hand and his grin nearly splitting his face. "They're done, man," he exclaimed. "Reservations are getting canceled left and right. People don't even want to be seen there anymore." Jackson smirked, shaking his head. They thought they could throw some buzzwords at the problem and make it go away. People are smarter than that. Maya joined them, scrolling through her phone with a satisfied expression. "It gets better," she said. "A few big-name celebrities just called them out directly. It's over for them." As the week wore on, Luster and Vine's downfall accelerated. Photos of empty dining rooms circulated online, a sharp contrast to the packed tables the restaurant had once boasted. Reports surfaced that several high-profile investors had pulled their support, citing the scandal as irreparable damage to the brand. Within days, rumors of a potential closure began to swirl. Jackson watched it all unfold with a sense of inevitability. He hadn't set out to destroy Luster and Vine, but actions had consequences, and now those consequences were coming to bear. One evening, Maya showed Jackson a message she had received from a local activist group. "Look at this," she said, handing him her phone. The message thanked Jackson and his team for shining a light on an issue that extended far beyond a single restaurant. It ended with a powerful sentiment: "You gave us a voice." Jackson leaned back in his chair, letting the words sink in. This wasn't about Luster and Vine anymore. It was about creating a ripple effect, inspiring others to stand up and demand better. When the official announcement came that Luster and Vine would be closing its doors permanently, it barely made headlines. By then, the public had moved on, their attention captured by the growing movement Jackson and his team had started. That night, Jackson drove past the darkened restaurant. The lights were off, the windows bare. He pulled over, stepping out of his car to take it all in. The once bustling establishment stood silent, a symbol of the change that was taking root. Jackson didn't feel triumphant or vindicated. What he felt was determination. This wasn't just about tearing something down. It was about building something better, something lasting. Jackson Wright stood silently outside the darkened shell of what had once been Luster and Vine, taking in the emptiness. Caleb joined him a few moments later, his expression contemplative. "It's kind of poetic, isn't it?" Caleb said quietly. "They tried to keep us out, and now there's nothing left to keep anyone out of." Jackson nodded, his gaze fixed on the empty building. "Yeah," he said softly, "but this isn't about them. It's about what we do next." The quiet night seemed to hold a promise. The fall of Luster and Vine wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of something much bigger. The restaurant's closure sent shockwaves far beyond Skyline City. News of the scandal spread across the country, igniting conversations about racism, exclusion, and accountability. But Jackson and his team had already shifted their focus. The Table for All event had grown from a single night into a powerful movement. Weeks after the first dinner, the hashtag Table for All continued to trend. Stories poured in from people across the nation who had faced similar discrimination. Activists, artists, and community leaders reached out, eager to bring the concept to their own cities. What began as a response to exclusion was evolving into something far greater, a nationwide call to action. Maya was the first to suggest expanding. Sitting in Jackson's living room with her laptop, she scrolled through dozens of emails and messages. "Look at this," she said, pointing to the screen. "People in Chicago, Atlanta, New York, they all want to host their own dinners. They're asking for advice on how to organize, how to make it happen." Caleb leaned over, his excitement unmistakable. "This is it, man. This is how we take it to the next level." Jackson nodded thoughtfully, leaning back in his chair. "If we're going to do this, we've got to do it right. We can't just hand them a name and walk away. We've got to help them build something real." And so the work began. Maya created a detailed guide for organizing Table for All events, covering everything from securing venues to involving local chefs and artists. Caleb tapped into his network of connections to reach potential sponsors, securing funds to support events in underserved communities. Jackson used his platform to amplify the movement, recording heartfelt videos and appearing on talk shows to spread the message. The response was overwhelming. Within weeks, Table for All dinners were being planned in cities across the country. Each event was unique, shaped by the culture, and identity of the local community, but they all shared the same mission: to create a space where everyone was welcome. One evening, as they finalized plans for the next dinner in Skyline City, Maya shared a story she had received from Atlanta. "Listen to this," she said, reading aloud. A young black chef named Malik had struggled for years to break into the high-end dining scene, facing constant rejection and thinly veiled racism. After hearing about the movement, he reached out, eager to host a table-for-all dinner. Malik was determined to bring together chefs of color from across Atlanta to showcase their talents. For the first time, Malik wrote, "I feel like I'm not just cooking for survival. I'm cooking for my people. This is bigger than food. It's about belonging." The room fell silent as Malik's words sank in. Jackson finally broke the silence. "That's what this is about," he said, "giving people a chance to be seen, to show what they can do." The first out-of-state dinner was held in Chicago, and it was a resounding success. The city's rich cultural heritage was on full display, with chefs serving everything from deep-dish pizza to Nigerian suya. Local artists transformed the venue with murals celebrating Black and brown communities, while musicians performed an eclectic blend of jazz, blues, and hip-hop. Jackson and Maya flew in for the event, walking into a room alive with laughter, music, and the unmistakable aroma of soul food. Malik was there, his face glowing with pride as he introduced his dishes to the crowd. "This is just the beginning," he told Jackson, shaking his hand. "We're going to do this every year." Similar events followed in Atlanta, New York, and Houston, each adding new voices and perspectives to the movement. News outlets began covering the dinners as a cultural phenomenon, highlighting how they brought people together while addressing deep-seated issues of exclusion and inequality. But with success came challenges. As Table for All gained traction, it also attracted criticism. Conservative commentators accused Jackson and his team of politicizing food and creating division where none existed. "They just can't let us have anything," Caleb said one afternoon, shaking his head as he scrolled through a string of negative comments online. Jackson shrugged, his expression calm but resolute. "Let them talk. This isn't for them. It's for the people who've been through it. The ones who know what it feels like to be told they don't belong." Maya nodded. "And the fact that they're upset? It means we're making an impact. If they weren't mad, we wouldn't be doing anything meaningful." Despite the criticism, the movement continued to grow. Each dinner became more than just a meal. It was a celebration of resilience and a reminder that spaces could be reclaimed and redefined. Jackson and his team had planted a seed, and now it was spreading far and wide. People who had once felt excluded were now finding their place at the table, using their voices to lift others up. This was no longer just an idea. It was a movement, one that was impossible to ignore. One evening, as the team prepared for another dinner in Skyline City, Caleb brought up the latest round of criticism. "Man, have you seen what they're saying on the news?" he asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "Talking about how we're making everything about race, how we're just trying to get attention." Jackson shrugged, his expression calm but resolute. "Let them talk. They don't get it because they don't live it. This isn't for them. It's for the people who've been through it, who know what it feels like to be told they don't belong." Maya nodded in agreement. "And the fact that they're talking means we're doing something right. If they weren't mad, we wouldn't be making an impact." The criticism only strengthened their resolve. Jackson refused to let the detractors overshadow the positive change they were creating. He reminded his team and himself that every step forward would come with pushback, but the work was worth it. As the months went on, the movement continued to flourish. Each Table for All dinner became more than just a meal. It was a celebration of resilience, a testament to how spaces could be reclaimed and redefined. People who had once felt excluded now had a seat at the table, and they were using that seat to lift others up. One night, after a particularly successful event in Houston, Jackson sat in the hotel lobby with Maya and Caleb. The three of them were exhausted but energized, the glow of the evening still fresh in their minds. "You think this can last?" Maya asked quietly, her voice tinged with hope. Jackson looked at her, his gaze steady. "It's not about lasting," he said. "It's about planting seeds. This thing we're doing, it's bigger than us. Even if it slows down, Even if we step back, the people we've touched, they're going to keep it going. Caleb raised his glass with a grin. To the seeds, then, and to everyone making sure they grow. The three of them clinked their glasses, their laughter echoing softly in the empty lobby. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they were building something that mattered. The Table for All wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a movement, and it was unstoppable. A year had passed since the first Table for All dinner. What had started as a passionate response to exclusion had grown into a powerful nationwide movement. Across the country, communities were hosting their own dinners, each one a vibrant celebration of culture, inclusion, and resilience. The movement had become a unifying symbol, a way for people to reclaim spaces where they had once been told they didn't belong. Jackson stood backstage at the latest Table for All event, held in a sprawling venue in downtown Skyline City. The warehouse where it had all started now seemed small compared to this expansive space, which had been transformed into a vibrant haven for the evening. Long tables stretched across the room, covered in crisp white linens and adorned with fresh flowers and candles. The air was alive with the aroma of diverse cuisines, blending into an irresistible symphony. The energy in the room was electric. Hundreds of guests had already arrived, chatting, laughing, and marveling at the art installations lining the walls. Each piece told a story of struggle, triumph, and community, contributed by artists who believed in the movement's message. Nearby, musicians rehearsed on stage, their instruments filling the air with the promise of a night to remember. Maya approached Jackson, a clipboard in hand. She looked polished and determined, her excitement barely contained. "The room's packed," she said, glancing at her phone. "We've got artists, chefs, activists. People flew in from all over the country for this." Jackson nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "They came because they believe in it. This isn't just a dinner anymore. It's a movement." Caleb appeared moments later, carrying a glass of champagne. "Man, you've got to see the crowd out there," he said, his grin wide. "They're hyped. This is bigger than anything we imagined." Jackson glanced toward the stage, his expression thoughtful. "It's not about how big it is," he said quietly. "It's about what it means." As the three of them stood together, the lights in the venue dimmed, signaling the start of the evening. Maya took a deep breath. "You ready?" Jackson nodded. "Always." He stepped onto the stage and the applause rose like a wave as the crowd spotted him. The sight was overwhelming. Hundreds of faces, each one reflecting hope, pride, and a shared sense of purpose. Jackson paused, letting the moment sink in before leaning into the microphone. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady and warm. "A year ago, we were told we didn't belong, but instead of accepting that, we built something of our own. We created a table where everyone is welcome." The crowd erupted into cheers, their enthusiasm reverberating through the room. Jackson raised a hand, a quiet gesture that brought the room back to a hush. His expression grew serious, his words deliberate. "This isn't just about tonight," he said. "It's about every night someone was made to feel like they weren't good enough. Every time someone was told they didn't belong. This table, it's for all of us. And it's proof that we don't need to wait for permission to take up space." The applause was deafening, the air electric with hope and pride. Jackson stepped back, letting the moment settle before continuing. "Tonight, we celebrate who we are, our culture, our stories, our strength. So let's eat, let's laugh, let's connect, and let's keep building. Because this," he said, gesturing to the vibrant room, "is just the beginning." As Jackson stepped off the stage, the crowd's cheers followed him. Maya and Caleb were waiting nearby, their faces glowing with pride. "That was perfect," Maya said, squeezing his shoulder. "You set the tone for the whole night." The evening unfolded in a whirlwind of connection, food, and music. Chefs emerged from their stations, carrying dishes that celebrated the diverse cultures represented in Skyline City. Spicy West African suya, rich Creole gumbo, fragrant biryani, and savory tamales graced the tables, each bite a testament to heritage and creativity. Guests savored the flavors, their laughter and conversation filling the space. On stage, performers kept the energy high. A spoken-word artist delivered a stirring poem about resilience and belonging, her words drawing nods of understanding and thunderous applause. A jazz band followed, their smooth melodies weaving through the room like a warm embrace. The night felt alive, every moment a celebration of community and the power of coming together. Jackson moved through the crowd, stopping to chat with guests at each table. At one table, a young man shared how the movement had inspired him to start his own restaurant, a space that prioritized inclusivity and diversity. At another, a mother spoke with quiet emotion about how the dinners had given her teenage daughter a newfound pride in her heritage. "It's not just a meal," she said, her eyes brimming with gratitude. "It's a reminder that we matter." Jackson nodded, his chest tightening with emotion. This was why they had done it, for people who had been made to feel small, for moments that reminded them of their worth. As the evening wound down, Jackson found himself back on stage. The room quieted as he looked out over the sea of faces. His heart full. "Thank you," he said, his voice steady but tinged with emotion. "Thank you for showing up, for believing in this, and for being part of something bigger than all of us. This table we've built, it's going to keep growing. And as long as we keep building, there will always be a place for everyone." The applause was thunderous, filling the room with hope and determination. As the guests began to leave, Jackson stood by the door, thanking each one personally. Their smiles, their gratitude, their stories, it all reaffirmed the importance of what they had created. When the last guest had departed, Jackson stood in the now empty venue. The tables, still covered with the remnants of a meal well enjoyed, seemed to hum with the night's lingering energy. Maya and Caleb joined him, their faces tired but triumphant. "We did it," Maya said softly, her voice filled with emotion. Jackson nodded, a small smile on his lips. "And we'll keep doing it." Caleb raised his glass, his grin wide. "To the next one." The three of them clinked their glasses, their laughter echoing softly in the quiet space. They knew the work wasn't done, that the road ahead would still hold challenges, but they also knew they were building something that mattered, something that would outlast them. As they stepped outside into the cool night air, Jackson looked up at the stars. The table for all was more than just a dinner, more than just a movement. It was a promise to keep fighting, to keep building, and to make sure that everyone, everywhere had a seat at the table. And he knew without a doubt that this was only the beginning. Thank you for following the story to the end. Jackson Wright and his team turned a moment of exclusion into a powerful movement, proving that unity in action can break down any barriers. If this story inspired you, be sure to subscribe for more uplifting stories like this one. Share it with your friends and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Together, let's keep building a world where everyone belongs.